I was halfway through grilling a burger the size of a frisbee when I heard the sound that changed everything. A hiss, not from the meat, but from something far more sinister. My dog, Buddy, had just unearthed a shiny metal object sticking out of the grass near my driveway. His snout was inches from it when he growled. At first, I thought it was just some old scrap until I took a closer look and realized it wasn't debris. It was a spike. Not one, not two, but an entire row of sharpened steel teeth, buried like a snake waiting to strike. And the kicker? Just 20 feet away, Brenda was trimming her hedge while whistling America the Beautiful, like she hadn't just turned our cul-de-sac into a military-grade trap. What she didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was that those tire spikes weren't going to wreck my car. They were going to wreck the wrong car. The very wrong car. Meadowbrook Estates looked like one of those too perfect neighborhoods you only see in real estate ads and satire films. Cookie-cutter homes, grass trimmed like it had an appointment with a barber, and an HOA with the same authority as a minor dictatorship. It's the kind of place where the most scandalous crime used to be someone using the wrong shade of white for their mailbox post. I moved here for peace and affordability, but I quickly learned peace is a privilege you don't get when your next-door neighbor is Brenda. Brenda wasn't just a name. It was a lifestyle. Platinum blonde bob, sunglasses the size of satellite dishes, and a voice trained specifically to project outrage across 3 front lawns. She treated the HOA handbook like scripture and enforced it with the zeal of a televangelist. Her hobbies included passive-aggressive notes, calling emergency meetings over Halloween decorations, and measuring grass blade lengths with a ruler. She had one sworn enemy, fun. And unfortunately, I radiated fun like a solar panel in the desert. I'm Alex, a laid-back mechanic with a love for off-road Jeeps, toolboxes that outnumber my furniture, and a golden retriever who thinks he's a detective. Buddy and I had moved into Meadowbrook Estates with the naive dream of quiet evenings and weekend barbecues. Instead, we'd walked into the suburban version of a Cold War. It started small, a noise complaint here, a letter taped to my garage about unauthorized bumper height there. I thought it was funny, even charming in a weird way. Brenda was just being Brenda, right? But like any good villain origin story, it didn't stay small for long. The barbecue was the breaking point. One sunny Saturday, I invited a few friends over, set up some lawn chairs, fired up the grill, and played some old-school rock from a modest Bluetooth speaker. By modest, I mean you could hear it on the porch, not from space. We were laughing, flipping burgers. Buddy was stealing hot dog buns, classic summer stuff. Then Brenda showed up with a decibel meter and a frown that could curdle milk. She marched straight through my lawn like Moses parting the Red Sea, held the device up to the speaker, and triumphantly announced, 87 decibels. The HOA limit is 75. I offered her a burger. She slapped it out of my hand. No exaggeration, a full-on backhanded burger slap. The mustard hit Buddy. He cried like he'd been betrayed by humanity. The party died faster than my social credit with the HOA. By Monday morning, I had a formal citation in my mailbox and a fine for disruptive conduct and improper waste disposal, which I assumed was code for dropped ketchup. That week, Brenda escalated her campaign. She called the HOA president daily. She snapped pictures of my Jeep like it was a criminal suspect. She even accused Buddy of being intimidating and petitioned to require all dogs over 30 pounds to wear muzzles. My dog licks doorbells. Brenda, he's not exactly Cujo. I played it cool. I figured if I ignored her long enough, she'd get bored and turn her attention to someone else, like the family who installed solar panels without approval. But Brenda wasn't wired for boredom. She was wired for vengeance. And that's when she crossed a line even she didn't realize existed. It was a Monday morning when I first spotted her acting strangely. She kept peering out of her window, disappearing into her garage with bags of something heavy, and spending an abnormal amount of time on her hands and knees near the edge of her property. I chalked it up to her finally planting those native shrubs she lectured us about in last month's HOA newsletter. But Buddy wasn't buying it. He growled at the spot she'd been working on every time we passed it. By Wednesday, I decided to walk over and take a look after she'd gone inside. What I found made me take 2 steps back. Just under the grass, slightly exposed by the morning dew, were metal spikes. They weren't just scattered junk. They were deliberately arranged, buried at an angle that would guarantee any vehicle backing out from my driveway would shred all 4 tires. It was subtle, precise, and it screamed Brenda. Now, I'm not one for confrontation unless there's a clear point, and honestly, the idea of Brenda explaining herself to the police made me want to make popcorn. But I also knew this couldn't stay quiet. What if someone else got hurt? What if a kid rode their bike over it? So, I did what any mildly responsible adult with a flair for the dramatic would do. I waited. I documented everything. Photos, videos. I even got Buddy to do a little spike detection dance for the camera, which was both adorable and surprisingly helpful. What I didn't expect was for the universe to intervene faster than I could. Because while Brenda was busy perfecting her sabotage, someone very important was about to visit Meadowbrook Estates. Someone who didn't take kindly to popping for brand new tires on Olivia's sedan. And when that happened, the game didn't just change, it exploded. The morning after I discovered the buried spikes, the air around my house felt different, thicker, heavier, like something was about to go wrong but hadn't quite decided how. Buddy, who usually greeted the day with tail wags and optimism, sat stiffly at the front door, staring out at Brenda's lawn like he expected it to grow fangs. I had half a mind to confront her, demand she explained why she'd suddenly become a hardware store Bond villain, but something held me back. Maybe it was the look she gave me the previous evening, the kind of smug satisfaction you only see in people who think they've already won. Or maybe it was the fact that I knew this wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. I stood at my driveway, coffee in hand, inspecting the edge of the lawn. The spikes were subtle, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. Brenda had covered them with just enough grass clippings and soil to make them disappear from a casual glance. But I could see the faint outlines, the glint of steel catching the morning sun like a warning from beneath the earth. It was no longer a prank or neighborhood squabble. It was a deliberate trap, and I wasn't going to be the fool who fell into it. That's when Buddy did something strange. He started barking at my Jeep. Not just any bark, his "something's wrong, Dad" bark. I glanced over, confused. The Jeep looked fine, but then he ran around to the back, tail stiff, and pawed at the ground near the rear wheels. That's when it hit me. Every morning, I backed out at an angle that would have perfectly lined up with those spikes. If I hadn't been late for work the day before and taken my bike instead, I'd be looking at 4 ruined tires and a reason to go full scorched earth. I scratched Buddy behind the ears, muttering a quiet thank you. He licked my hand, pleased with himself. I decided then and there I wasn't going to play into Brenda's hands. Not yet. I'd let her think her trap was set and working. I'd watch. I'd wait. If she wanted to play chess, I'd be the guy flipping the board when it suited me. Later that afternoon, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. People were out trimming hedges, washing cars, pretending not to peek over fences to see if I'd explode over the latest Brenda drama. But today wasn't about me. Today was about something else entirely. A sleek black Lexus glided down the road and turned into Meadowbrook Estates with the confidence of someone who knew the rules didn't apply to her. The car was spotless, shiny enough to reflect Brenda's inflated ego. And behind the wheel was none other than Judge Evelyn Reed. Known across town for her no-nonsense approach and ability to silence a courtroom with a glance, she wasn't just respected, she was feared. And unfortunately for Brenda, she had come here today. Brenda, ever the social climber, practically sprinted from her house the moment the Lexus appeared. She wore her best pastel pantsuit, lipstick like she'd painted it with a crayon, and that painfully fake smile she reserved for important people. She greeted the judge with the energy of a game show host, waving her arms dramatically and launching into an unsolicited tour of the quiet, regulation-loving community we've built here. Judge Reed stepped out of her car with the calm presence of someone who had seen everything and been impressed by none of it. She nodded politely, glanced around, and barely acknowledged Brenda's running commentary. But Brenda didn't need approval. She just needed proximity to power. She led the judge around, pointing out each neighbor's lawn as if she'd personally maintained them. When they passed my house, I gave them a lazy wave. Brenda stiffened. The judge raised an eyebrow and said nothing. After 20 minutes of aimless chatter, the judge politely thanked Brenda and began walking back to her car. Brenda, still desperate to impress, insisted she park in her driveway rather than on the street, babbling something about security and image. The judge hesitated, then nodded and stepped toward the vehicle. I saw it coming a second before it happened. A chill ran down my spine. I opened my mouth to shout, to warn her, but it was too late. The Lexus backed out of the driveway. There was a sound, a sickening pop, followed by another, and then drawn-out hisses that echoed through the entire street. The rear of the car dropped an inch, then another, like it was sinking into quicksand. For tires gone, flattened in under 5 seconds. Brenda froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked from the tires to the judge to me, as if trying to calculate which direction the storm would come from. The judge calmly stepped out, walked around the car, and crouched beside one of the tires. She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was dangerously quiet. "Why?" she asked, staring at the embedded steel. "Are there homemade tire spikes buried in your driveway?" Brenda stammered. I didn't. There must have been vandals. Teenagers. This is a prank." The judge straightened. "A prank that involved precision placement, angled spikes, and selective coverage, Ms. Brenda? I am a judge, not a fool." I nearly choked trying to hold back my laughter. A few neighbors had gathered, trying to look busy while clearly eavesdropping. One of them, the retired guy with a telescope who thought no one knew he was nosy, muttered, "Oh, she's toast." Brenda looked like she might faint. She turned to me as if somehow this was still my fault. I simply smiled and sipped my lemonade, enjoying the front row seat to karma in 4K resolution. The judge pulled out her phone, took photos of the damage, the spikes, and Brenda's expression, then calmly called for roadside assistance and the local authorities. As the tow truck arrived and Brenda tried to explain away the entire incident with frantic hand gestures and half-finished sentences, I realized something important. The game had changed. Brenda wasn't the predator anymore. She was the one tangled in her own trap. And the more she struggled, the worse it would get. This wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. It was about to become very, very public. And for the first time since I moved in, I actually looked forward to the next HOA meeting. The neighborhood was humming with the kind of electricity that only comes after a scandal erupts like a geyser and soaks everyone within a 3-house radius. Judge Reed's Lexus had been unceremoniously towed away, its tires shredded beyond recognition, and Brenda had been left standing there like a statue carved out of sheer panic. The moment the tow truck rounded the corner, neighbors who had spent years pretending not to know each other were suddenly best friends again, all whispering versions of the same question. Did Brenda really do it? The answer was yes, obviously, but knowing it and proving it were two different things. Brenda, to her credit, went into damage control mode so fast it was like watching a politician scramble after a hot mic incident. By the end of the day, she'd plastered the neighborhood group chat with long-winded explanations involving imaginary vandals, shadowy teens with a grudge against suburban order, and something about anarchists who hate the HOA. No one believed her, not even the new couple who just moved in last week and hadn't even unpacked their blender yet. The next morning, the evidence started coming in. And by evidence, I mean the glorious, pixel-perfect, high-definition doorbell footage from my across-the-street neighbor's house. Frank wasn't the friendliest guy on the block. He still hadn't returned my leaf blower, but he had a camera system that could probably catch satellites. And sure enough, his footage from 2 nights prior showed a shadowy figure crawling around Brenda's driveway at precisely 1:42 a.m., planting what looked suspiciously like metal objects into the ground with the care of someone planting a flower bed of doom. The best part? She wore her bathrobe, bright pink with flamingos on it, a fashion choice so outrageous that even without a face shot, it was unmistakably Brenda. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Frank uploaded the video to the neighborhood chat with the casual caption, "Not sure who this is." Any guesses? The chat exploded. People who hadn't said a word in 6 months were suddenly cracking jokes, making memes, and sharing popcorn emojis. It was like watching an entire community get invited to a secret roast. Brenda, to no one's surprise, did not appreciate the humor. She fired back with threats of lawsuits, accusations of slander, and even claimed the video was AI-generated. That last one really made the rounds. Within an hour, someone had deep-faked her flamingo robe into a Marvel trailer. By sunset, she'd locked herself in her house and closed all the blinds. But Brenda wasn't finished. No, she was just reloading. The next day, I got a knock on my door. Not a neighbor, not a delivery guy. It was a man in a gray suit holding an envelope and wearing the kind of serious expression normally reserved for surgeons and IRS agents. He handed it to me without a word. Inside was a summons. Brenda had filed a formal complaint, not just with the HOA, but with the local court. According to her, I had framed her, planted the spikes myself, manipulated video evidence, and worst of all, orchestrated the whole thing to ruin her reputation and destabilize the community. Her words, not mine. For a moment, I just stood there in disbelief. Then I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the situation had reached a level of absurdity that no normal brain could process in silence. Brenda had actually dragged this to court. She thought if she went big enough, fast enough, she could flip the script before the truth settled in. I showed up to the hearing 2 days later in jeans, a clean t-shirt, and a calm expression. Buddy came too. Emotional support animal, I explained. No one questioned it. Brenda arrived in full courtroom cosplay. Blazer, pearls, a manila folder stuffed with what I assumed was either junk mail or coupons, and immediately launched into a dramatic retelling of her version of events. She told the judge, not Reed this time, but another local official, that I had a history of unhinged mechanical behavior, that my dog was trained to dig up evidence, that the entire neighborhood was under the sway of my charismatic influence like I was some kind of suburban cult leader. It was a performance worthy of an award. Unfortunately for her, it was also unraveling faster than a cheap sweater in a tornado. My lawyer didn't have to say much. We played the video. We presented a sworn statement from Frank. And then came the piece de resistance. Buddy. Now, Buddy isn't your average golden retriever. He's smart. Weirdly smart. One of the tricks I taught him was how to respond to laser pointers like a cat, but with more enthusiasm and less grace. So, when I clicked my pointer on the courtroom floor and waved it near a printed diagram of Brenda's lawn, he barked once and pointed his paw directly at the location where the spikes were buried. The room broke into laughter. Even the judge had to cover his mouth. Brenda objected, claimed it was circus behavior, and accused Buddy of being coached. My lawyer asked if she was implying dogs could be bribed into perjury. The judge didn't laugh, but I swear his mouth twitched. And then came the final nail, GPS data from Brenda's gardening gloves. Yes, gardening gloves. She'd bought a smart pair that tracked pressure and movement, part of some influencer wellness trend she'd tried to copy. The data, subpoenaed from the manufacturer, showed late-night digging sessions in her front yard, matching the exact date and time of the spike installation. The judge didn't take long. He dismissed her claims, fined her for wasting court time, and referred her to a higher court for possible charges relating to the property damage and false report. Brenda's face as the verdict was read could have cracked glass. The ride home was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. Because as satisfying as the win was, I knew Brenda wasn't the type to back down after one public humiliation. No, people like her didn't admit defeat. They regrouped, they brooded, and they came back with worse ideas. But for now, I had the upper hand. The neighborhood had rallied. The truth was out. That night, I sat on my porch with Buddy, sharing a bowl of popcorn while we watched Brenda's lights flick on and off like a lighthouse of lunacy. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor started playing Another One Bites the Dust, just loud enough for her to hear. Buddy gave me a look like he was ready for round 2 if it came, and I smiled because so was I. The days following the court verdict felt like a victory parade without the floats. Brenda, once the loudest voice in the neighborhood, had gone radio silent. Her front yard, previously trimmed to within an inch of its life, started showing signs of rebellion. Weeds peeked through cracks in her perfect sidewalk. Her porch lights flickered, not from neglect, but perhaps from a woman too ashamed to call an electrician. People waved at me more now. Some even dropped off cookies and said things like, "You really handled that well," or "She had it coming." I tried to stay humble, but when your dog gets a bag of homemade peanut butter biscuits with a handwritten note that says, "For justice," you allow yourself a moment of pride. But peace in Meadowbrook Estates was never built to last, especially not when the HOA had to save face. The president, Mr. Henderson, a man who had managed to both take credit for the community garden and also blame its death on squirrels, was clearly sweating under the pressure. With Brenda publicly humiliated and whispers of HOA mismanagement swirling like autumn leaves, he needed to show he was still in control. So, in the world's most ironic twist, he scheduled a mandatory HOA meeting themed around community unity and healing. The headliner? Brenda herself. Apparently, as part of her court sentence, Brenda had agreed, or more likely been ordered, to complete community service in the form of organizing a neighborhood-wide event aimed at mending relationships. On the flyer was a picture of her smiling like she'd been forced to do so at gunpoint. The event was titled the Great Meadowbrook Estates Forgiveness Barbecue. I nearly choked on my coffee. The day of the barbecue arrived with the kind of energy usually reserved for reality TV finales. People came not just for the food, but for the sheer curiosity of seeing Brenda try to be nice to anyone. She had set up tables with painfully cheerful tablecloths, a grill that looked like it had never been used before, and a giant sign that read, "Let's turn the heat down on hatred." Someone had clearly helped her with that, because Brenda barely knew how to reset her Wi-Fi. She wore a yellow apron with daisies on it and greeted everyone with robotic enthusiasm. "Welcome, friend," she said to Mrs. Davis, who'd had a running feud with Brenda over bird feeders for 3 years. "Glad you could make it, champ," she told me with a smile so tight I thought her face might crack. Buddy sniffed her shoes and then sat down, unimpressed. As the grill smoked and the crowd mingled, Brenda began her official apology speech. She cleared her throat and unfolded a piece of paper. "Neighbors," she began, "I realized that some of my past behavior may have been perceived as aggressive." That got a few chuckles. She squinted into the sun. "I allowed personal frustrations to manifest in inappropriate ways, and for that, I am regretful." She meant to say sorry, but the word never quite made it out of her mouth. Then came the best part. As part of the healing process, she had agreed to do a goodwill gesture toward each household. Some people got potted plants. Others got apology cards with vague messages like, "Hope we can be neighborly again." I got something special. A fruit basket with oranges wrapped in barbed wire ribbon. Subtle? No. Passive-aggressive? Absolutely. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. But karma hadn't finished with Brenda yet. Midway through the event, while flipping burgers, she managed to accidentally knock the entire tray into the grill. Flames shot up like a bonfire and triggered the automatic sprinkler system she'd once bragged about installing to deter raccoons. The yard became a soggy mess. People scrambled, paper plates dissolved, and kids ran through puddles like it was a theme park. Brenda stood in the middle of it, soaked, holding a pair of charred tongs and looking like she just lost a war. It should have been the end of it, but the HOA wasn't quite done imploding. Days after the barbecue, news broke that Mr. Henderson had been quietly covering up misuse of community funds, like buying decorative planters for his backyard and labeling them as beautification supplies. The community voted him out in record time, and a new HOA president was chosen. Henry Peterson, my next-door neighbor, a retired Navy SEAL who once told me he considered leaf blowers to be instruments of chaos and refused to use one on principle. Henry didn't believe in passive aggression. He believed in order. And when he took over the HOA, he gutted half the rule book, fired the overpriced landscaping service, and instituted a monthly neighborhood gathering called Humor Hour, where people could anonymously share funny complaints just to blow off steam. It was cathartic. The first submission was, "Can someone tell Brenda that clapping when people finish mowing is not encouragement? It's terrifying." Brenda didn't say much after that. Her public profile deflated. The woman who once stalked mailboxes for infractions now stayed mostly indoors, blinds drawn, sightings rare. Rumor had it she was considering selling her house and moving somewhere with a more disciplined HOA, which, in my opinion, didn't exist. But just when we thought things had settled, Brenda did something unexpected. She knocked on my door. I opened it, suspicious. She stood there holding a tray of lemon squares and wearing what I assume was a peace-offering expression. "I baked these," she said, as if that explained everything. Buddy sniffed the tray and immediately looked at me like he was being set up. "I didn't poison them, if that's what you're thinking," she added. "I wasn't, I lied." We stood in awkward silence. Then she sighed. "I'm leaving." I blinked. "Like, leaving the neighborhood?" She nodded. "Putting the house on the market next week. Somewhere quieter, fewer mechanics." I almost laughed, but didn't. Instead, I just nodded. "Good luck." She handed me the lemon squares, turned, and walked back across the lawn without another word. Buddy watched her go, then lifted his leg on a lawn gnome. I took that as his final verdict. Later that night, I found a note tucked under the tray. It read, "I'm not good at apologies, but you won fair and square. Consider this a truce." At the bottom was a tiny sketch of her flamingo bathrobe. I didn't know what to make of it, but somehow it felt like closure. The neighborhood kept moving. People mowed their lawns, kids chalked the sidewalks, and Buddy resumed his daily mission to liberate every unattended sandwich. Life had returned to its chaotic, slightly dysfunctional, but peaceful rhythm. Brenda was leaving. I was staying. And for the first time since I moved into Meadowbrook Estates, it really felt like home. Weeks passed after Brenda's departure announcement, and the neighborhood felt like it had exhaled for the first time in years. There was a lightness in the air, as if the collective tension that had wrapped itself around every HOA meeting, every lawn inspection, and every passive-aggressive mailbox note had finally lifted. People began decorating with less fear. One neighbor installed a flamingo lawn army just for laughs. Another put up string lights in February, and no one said a word. The unspoken war between order and freedom had finally tilted towards sanity, and honestly, it felt like summer in a sitcom. Brenda's house sat quiet, the blinds permanently drawn, her once polished hedges growing lopsided like they'd been liberated from their weekly punishments. A for sale sign finally appeared in her front yard, planted at a perfectly mathematical angle, probably the last thing she'd done with precision before retreating into her fortress of shame. Rumor had it she was listing the home as a serene property in a close-knit community known for its integrity. Integrity was doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. I kept my distance, not out of spite, but because some endings don't need a victory lap. Still, I had to admit I was curious about how she'd wrap up her exit. Would there be a final performance? A monologue on justice and lawn height? A last-minute attempt to reclaim her imagined throne? Surprisingly, none of that happened. For the most part, Brenda remained invisible until moving day. It was a bright Saturday morning when the moving truck arrived, big, loud, and operated by two guys who looked like they had stories they could never legally tell. A few neighbors gathered at a safe distance, not openly gawking, but not exactly pretending not to watch either. Buddy sat beside me on the porch, head tilted, tail wagging slowly like he sensed the end of an era approaching. Brenda emerged in jeans and a sweatshirt, a far cry from her usual power walking attire. She didn't look angry or smug or even defeated, just tired. She gave a curt nod to the movers, pointed them toward her garage, and disappeared back inside. Box after box came out, most labeled things like seasonal decor or HOA documents. I swear one was marked emergency clipboards. It would have been funny if it didn't feel like the closing scene of a really weird play. Then came the moment I didn't expect. She walked over to my driveway, carrying something covered in a blue sheet. I stood up, unsure what this was supposed to be. She stopped in front of me, nodded once, and said, "This is for you." She paused. I thought about burning it, but you'll probably appreciate the craftsmanship. Before I could answer, she pulled off the sheet. It was a lawn gnome, but not just any gnome. It was custom-made, wearing a mechanic's jumpsuit, holding a wrench, with a miniature golden retriever at its feet. My likeness was disturbingly accurate. The gnome even had a tiny scratch on its cheek, just like the one I got when Buddy tried to wake me up with an overzealous paw. I blinked at it, then at her. "I don't know why I had it made," she said. "Maybe I thought I'd bury it in your yard like a threat. Maybe I just wanted to remember who managed to outsmart me." She turned to leave, then paused. "Don't let this place get too soft. A little order's not the enemy." I watched her walk away, the gnome in my hands, caught between disbelief and reluctant respect. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't redemption. But it was something close to acknowledgement that counted for more than I expected. Brenda left by noon. The truck rumbled down the street, her car following behind it like a ship sailing away from a war zone. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful, like a rainstorm had passed and the world was drying off. A few weeks later, I decided to turn my experiences into something useful, not just for me, but for everyone who'd been caught in Brenda's web. I started a video series called Neighborhood Nightmares. It was equal parts storytelling, satire, and survival guide for dealing with suburban dictators. I shared everything: how to spot a spike trap, how to disarm a weaponized HOA, and how to stay cool when your dog becomes the neighborhood's moral compass. It blew up faster than I expected. Apparently, people across the country had their own Brendas, some worse, some funnier. One guy in Ohio swore his neighbor threw eggs labeled illegal decorations at his Halloween display. The channel became more than a side project. It became a small community of its own. People sent stories. Others sent gifts. One fan mailed Buddy a cape. He wore it proudly during walks, head high, like he knew he was famous now. A local newspaper even ran a piece on us titled, "The Man Who Took Down a Suburban Tyrant with a Dog and a Lemonade Smile." Meadowbrook Estates evolved too. The new HOA, under Henry's watchful yet surprisingly chill leadership, turned the neighborhood from a rulebook battlefield into a cooperative community. People painted their fences fun colors. One guy even built a mailbox shaped like a rocket ship. No one protested. Instead, we had a monthly feature house spotlight that celebrated creativity instead of crushing it. Buddy became the unofficial mascot. He got invited to more barbecues than I did. Kids came by to pet him before school. He barked exactly once at every Amazon delivery driver, like it was his civic duty, then wagged his tail in triumph. He was thriving, just like the neighborhood. Then one evening, as I sat on my porch sipping a cold drink and watching the sun dip behind the row of now vibrantly unique houses, I noticed a car slowed down near Brenda's old place. It was sleek, black, same make as hers but newer. A woman stepped out, clipboard in hand, sunglasses too big for her face. She surveyed the lawn like she was appraising a crime scene. I narrowed my eyes, leaned forward. Could it be? Nope, not Brenda. Just someone who bore the unmistakable posture of someone thinking about forming a new HOA rule. Buddy growled, low and cautious. I patted his head. Easy, buddy. Let's give her a chance. One Brenda per lifetime is enough. Still, just in case, I dusted off the gnome and placed it at the edge of my yard. My own little monument to a battle well fought. A reminder that no matter how tidy a neighborhood looks, chaos can always find a flower bed to hide in. But for now, all was calm. No tire spikes, no citations, just a man, his dog, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing he didn't just survive the storm. He made it rain justice.